Gil, thank you for that introduction. That kind of raised the bar a little bit, I'm afraid. But anyway, it is truly a pleasure to be here. I'm really humbled that this good group of my friends asked me to be out here and speak to you this morning. And you know, I wish them all the best today. And just a great crowd. Great to see some old friends and new friends and acquaintances in the group today, and just really glad to be here. Gil touched on a few things, and I won't spend a lot of time here, but my wife and I own Sassafras Valley Ranch, and that's in Bell, Missouri. And she was teaching summer school, so she decided to stay home on this one. But if y'all haven't met her, hopefully you'll get to it the next event. We've got about 625 acres that we own, and we're scattered out like Gil. We've got about 11 different farms that we lease, and several acres there. And I've always thought Gil was kind of a kindred spirit, and some of the things that they're doing on their operation kind of matches ours. We're scattered out, and I tell you some of this just because it's going to help you understand the perspective that I'm going to come from today. We've got about 300 South Pole cows. Some of those are partner cows. We'll talk about that a little bit. Some commercial hair sheep and a few goats. The centerpiece is obviously the South Poles, but we do appreciate some of those other complementary top things. So here's what they asked me to talk about, and I'm tickled to talk about this because this is my favorite subject in the whole world. They want me to talk about low-cost cattle production. And that's what I'm going to do today. I put some thought into this, and I'm going to try to walk you through our operation a little bit and talk to you about these 10 or so things that I've got listed up here that have kind of rose to the top for me in the last 20 years. So these are just kind of some of the things that I've identified. We're going to go through each of these. So, and you know what? Anybody that's in the cattle business has experienced rising input cost, right? I mean, that's whatever business you're in, and so we're having to deal with that. And so I think the group picked the right topic to talk to you about. And part of my message today in low input cattle production is going to be, take away, spend less, take away. That's going to be an important part of my message, but it's not going to be my total message. I'm going to maybe encourage you to spend some money sometimes, because I think sometimes we have to spend money to make money. So I want to be clear. And I think my challenge and what I'm tasked with today is to make you think a little bit. I'm going to take that serious. In order to do that, I may have to irritate you some. So you're not going to always agree with my message. And if I see you shaking your head, that means I've got you to thinking and I've done my job. Because look, I'm several hundred miles from home, so I'm not that worried about offending you today. Because I'm going to go back to Missouri and I can hide out and y'all forget all about me. So I'm going to challenge your thinking a little bit and try to do that today. And I don't pretend that you should cookie cutter this message. And before this day's over, I'll have learned more than anybody here. And we're constantly adjusting what we're doing. But I'm going to try to challenge you a little bit. Before I go into each of these, I want to get a little bit more of a feel. I've told you about myself, and Gil's introduced me. How many of y'all are from Virginia? I'm going to start with that. A bunch of you. How many of you are from a state that surrounds Virginia, touches? And how many of you are further away than that? Okay, so we've got mostly a local. That's good. That means I'm going to be able to get away from most of y'all. My next question is, how many of y'all have got South Poles currently? Okay, maybe a third of the room. And obviously you're all interested, you wouldn't be here. How many of you consider yourselves kind of grazing centered? And be honest with me and yourself. And how many of you are pretty traditional? Be honest. Oh, okay. Well, I should get along pretty good with this crowd. So none of y'all are very traditional, and that may work to my benefit. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to go into detail about each of these, but the first thing that we got to start with is raising the right kind of cattle. I think any discussion about low-cost cattle production has to start there. And these are in no particular order, except that one has to rise to the top. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about grazing management. There again, nothing goes more hand in hand to me than the right kind of cattle than doing some grazing management. I have to start there. That's going to kind of lead me into some hay and feeding advice. We'll spend a little bit of time there. And then what I call following a simple recipe to cattle production. I'm going to talk about calving time considerations a little bit, talk about someone else's land and someone else's cattle and a strategy there. Okay, I'll get into all this. Some diversity. I'm going to answer the question of what do I feel about fertilizer and machinery. And then some of these things don't have anything to do with cattle, and that may disappoint y'all because y'all wanted me to just talk about cattle, but we're going to talk about debt and finances a little bit because that might be more important than anything we'll talk about. And don't try to be everything and then just kind of some of my final and other things that just didn't fit in this category. So I'm going to start out talking about raising the right kind of cattle. And I tell you, and Gil told you I've been around some universities and had an education in animal science and beef production and learned a lot. And I met some great people and I've always tried to keep an open mind to that. But I tell you, one of the real tragedies to me in this business is the dang country is full of cattle that cannot produce in their environment without help, without crutches. And I mean, they're everywhere. I don't care if you drive around Virginia or Missouri and anywhere in between, south or north. We got an industry that, because we've been by and largely encouraged to produce bigger, or whatever, chase a certain color or a lot of milk. And I'm going to argue that those kind of cattle cannot raise a big enough calf, cannot raise a valuable enough calf, and do it often enough to dig ourselves out of that hole. And so I think it's a tragedy that our business is really full of cattle that can't take care of themselves. And so raising the right kind of cattle is really a key start to low-cost cattle production. I've got a good friend, and he's an ag business specialist with the University of Missouri. And I mean, this guy's sharp now, and he thinks like a lot of us non-traditional people think. And he likes to say all the time, and I'll read this quote, "Our industry was built on cheap land, cheap fuel, cheap feed, and cheap fertilizer. And those things are not existent anymore." And I'm going to argue that if you look at break-evens in the cattle business, it didn't work even when they were cheap, but it sure won't work now. And how many of y'all think that land's going to get a lot cheaper? Anybody? If you do, I would like to know where you're from because I'm interested. Is fuel, are we going to buy $1 a gallon gas again in our lives? I can't imagine that we are. And so these things aren't going to go away. We're going to have to face them. And I think the right kind of cattle is what it's going to take. I think we need cattle that take care of themselves. They're moderate in size. They don't have too much milk. Man, I hear producers all the time bragging to me how much milk their cattle produce. Marv told us he grew up on a dairy farm. He left that dairy farm. We're not in the dairy business, folks. We just need enough milk for that animal to raise their calf. Optimums, and that's already been talked about a little bit. We need bulls that are fertile off of grass. We need females that can take care of themselves and will breed back every year on a grass situation. And that's really I'll talk about some selection. That's where we draw the line. A cow that can breed is a cow that stays on our place, and that's what we need. They need to be gentle and easy enough to handle that we can get them loaded. That's important for me off of lease farms where I don't have facilities. Optimum. Not too big, not too much milk. That's what I think we need in this business, and that's what's kind of got me on this South Pole path. And you guys got a pretty good opportunity today. We got those right kind of cattle standing out there, and so what an opportunity! And I can promise you those opportunities don't come along. I've got a waiting list on heifers. Everybody's calling, looking for them, and so the right kind of cattle, happen to be standing here today, and so kind of help yourself there a little bit. All right, next. For our operation, grazing management is really central. These two things go hand in hand: right kind of cattle and some grazing management. And one of the biggest messages that I feel like in terms of grazing management is extending that grazing season as much as possible. Boy, just getting another day, and we got enough cattle. If I can buy another day, that's real money in my pocket. That's a lot of stored feed that I don't have to feed. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The third point that I make there is I just simply say understock. Man, I was glad to drive around a little bit in Virginia, and I see that y'all also overstock your pastures. Not y'all maybe, but I've seen a fair amount of short grass. This is May. If your pastures are short today, I mean, you're probably not doing any kind of grazing management, but it probably doesn't matter. You're overstocked. And that's a pretty simple message. And I'm sorry, but I see overstocked people that are traditional farmers, and I see people that are so-called grazing based, and they're overstocked too. My buddy Wes Tucker, I read his quote about the cheap fuel. He likes to call that, he said it's egonomics, not economics. And he says, and he's right, he said if you got 5 cows, you'd like to have 10. And he said if you got 20, you'd like to have 40. If you got 100 cows, you want 200. And I bet you everybody in here is guilty of that. He says that's egonomics. And that's when we let our ego about having a bunch of cows get in the way of economics. And he's right. He's right. And so I encourage you in the pursuit of low-cost cattle production, you have to be understocked. Because guess what? You'd be like me this year, and we didn't get any rain in May. And so you have to be prepared for that. And a pretty simple way of doing it's, being understocked. And I'm not, when I say understocked, maybe it's keep back some steers, take in some extra cattle. I mean, there's some ways you can utilize that extra grass, but ultimately, as an industry as a whole, I'm going to say a lot of us are overstocked, plain and simple. Next point I'm going to make there is, and this is the first time I've told you to spend some money on it, and there again, this is a low-cost cattle production. Now I'm telling you to get your wallet out. But I do think, for us, a place that we've spent a fair amount of money through the years is on water and fencing resources. In fact, before I went to the airport Thursday night, I finished up a big water line project. We're always trying to, add some water around. We know that's a key to getting us to graze properly. The fencing deal, it's an unfair advantage. I can rent ground that other people don't want because they say there's no fences on it. We can string up some poly wire and we're in business. And so you can really take advantage of that. This next point I want to make is, and I'm going to kind of be careful and think a little bit about how I make this point. I'm going to encourage you to do some sort of grazing management. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you to move your cows 3 times a day. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you to move your cows once every 3 weeks. Just shut the dang gates occasionally. Do something that moves you in the right direction towards some grazing management. I drive around and I see people that have 3 or 4 pastures and all the gates are open. We can help ourselves just by shutting those gates and moving those cattle in those 4 different pastures. You have to start somewhere. You have to walk before you run. And so I have a little bit simpler message when it comes to grazing management. This may be a letdown. I think you should keep the cattle in as large a group as possible, leave as much residual as possible, and move them as often as possible. How often that is, and how big that group is, and how much residual that is, I don't know, because everybody's operation is different. But we got to work in a direction there, and I think that'll help us. All right. Last thing I'm going to make on this slide is I've got a little bit of a manage what I have philosophy. And this may irritate some of you, but in our area, we're blessed with fescue, or cursed with it, however you want to look at it. And that's what we have, and we can fight that all we want. And I feel like in the grazing circle, man, we will cuss a bag of feed. All of us will. Maybe not all of us, but and act like that's just a sin to have a bag of feed, and then we'll turn around and buy a bag of seed that'll about break us. So I'm not big into planting a bunch of stuff. If you're in the grass-fed beef business, that's a different story. If you're in the mama cow business, you know, there's lots of places to spend your money in this world, and you can get crazy. You can get excited and get to planting and getting crazy there. And I'm going to argue you need to go back and do your math and make sure that it is actually truly making you some money and saving you some money. So, you know, and I'll take you through a few pictures. I'm going to encourage you, graze those underutilized areas. You know, graze some woodlands and savannas, and you know, try to take advantage of every little opportunity you can get. And if we're going to get more serious about grazing management, to me, as we get to rolling into the fall, that's where it can really help us. You know, employ some strip grazing. We love to strip graze, especially you know, in the fall, and really stretch those forage resources out. And you guys you didn't raise your hand that you're traditionalists, but man, I got people in my area, when November rolls around, it's time to feed hay. It doesn't matter if they're out of grass. They could have been out of grass in August. They could run out of grass in January, but you know, Grandpa fed in November, so that's what we're going to do. And man, this is when it really matters. If you can have cattle out there grazing late into the fall and in the winter, I mean, heck, there's grass everywhere today. This is when it really matters. You know, November rolls around, just keep on grazing. You know, these cattle can, if you've got something for them to eat, they'll eat through a lot of snow too. I don't know if y'all have experienced that, but just keep on grazing right through winter if there's something for them to eat. Now, I've never told y'all at any point so far in my talk, nor am I going to, that we're trying to starve a profit out of anything. That's not the answer to low-cost cattle production. I got neighbors that are low-cost cattle producers, and you can about read a newspaper through their cows. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about keeping plenty of grass in front of them. All right, so that kind of rolls me into there's another shot there from wintertime. That kind of rolls me into some hay and feeding. And if we're going to talk about low-cost cattle production, we've got to spend some time here, because this is really, what we spend on feed and especially stored feed is probably going to drive our business, if we're profitable or not. Number one cost in a cow is feed. And when I say feed, that we got to count grazing, but we also got to count the supplementation. So I'm going to start by saying, once again, grazing management is central to our operation. Okay, I want to repeat that again, because that's where we're going to start. But I do want to talk about feed and hay a little bit, and I'm going to spend most of the time talking about hay. I'm going to say, well, in our operation, we are not feeding any tubs or cubes or feed. We've just taken that away from the cattle, and we try to raise the right kind of cattle that'll deal with that. And I'm going to say, if you're in the cattle business and you're raising cows, I'm going to at least encourage you to minimize your supplemental feed. I think we got to have the right kind of cattle that can live without those crutches, or at least for the most part. It's a tool. You're not starving. If you got to do something. But I'm just going to say minimize feed is probably going to be my recommendation. All right. So what about hay? And I'll spend a little bit more time about hay. There again, I think we need to minimize it to the best of our ability. But in our area, we can buy hay pretty reasonable. We really can. And now, I don't bale any hay. I don't own a piece of hay equipment. We buy all of our hay. And in my area, I may buy 1,000 big ground bales this year. And man, I get some people that say, what in the heck how can you even think about buying that much hay when you could bale it yourself and save that much money, right? And I think this is one of those areas where sometimes we think we're being the low-cost producer by baling our own hay, where we might be better off to buy it. Because what that does, it frees up our hay ground to graze, first of all, and it also, we're taking someone else's nutrients, and that's where I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. When you buying someone else's hay, you're buying their fertility, right? And I put some numbers here. in a big bale of hay, there's a lot of nitrogen. You don't get all that nitrogen, and there's some phosphorus and potassium too. Somewhere around $25 to $30 worth of nutrients on today's market, given the cost of fertilizer. Okay, so that means if I could buy hay for $25 to $30, all I've done is paid for the nutrients. The feeding part is free to me, and you really have to think about it that way. And so, and of course, the consequence is if you're baling hay or selling hay, which is probably a bigger sin in my opinion, you've got to account for that fertility removal from your farm. Now, you may be transferring it from your hay fields to another area, but you're still stealing it somewhere. And so, I think we have to keep that in mind. Now, in order to take advantage of that, though, we've got to get that hay spread out, right? And so we employ a few different methods of hay feeding. We've got a couple of different bale beds. I'm real scattered out. Boy, this is a fast and easy way to feed some hay. And if I had the right weather, I'd probably do this everywhere. Unroll hay, spread those nutrients out. But the problem is it gets muddy. And so we look at some different things. We've got a kind of a Greg Judy style bale unroller that we'll use when it gets muddy, especially around the house, and spread some nutrients out that way. Anybody been doing any bale grazing? Raise your hand, a few of you. We like this. It's not perfect in every situation, but when we've got some pretty rough and rocky and ridge type ground that needs some help, we've put as many as 300 bales out. My brother-in-law, they got a lot of cattle. He'll say, "Man, I fed 20 bales of hay today." I said, "I fed 300." We put them all out in one day, and then dole them out the rest of the year. A great tool. It's not for everybody. It's not in every situation. I don't see me moving exclusively to this, but man, we can save some money. We're taking someone else's fertility. We're handling the hay, and a lot of times only once. And we fed 300 cows this last winter, and I think I started a tractor 3 times. And didn't make a rut. I hate ruts. Hate ruts on my place, and so this has a place. Bale grazing, check that out if you haven't. One other thing we do, and hopefully you can get a little bit of an idea of that from the pictures. And we got a hilly ground like you guys got here, and a lot of times as we're buying hay, and say in June, doesn't matter, we'll kind of do some math and anticipate our needs, and we'll line those up along a fence and just put a poly wire behind them. And then when it's time to feed hay, we'll just come by, shove the poly wire down, and shove a bale of hay. We don't have to start any equipment. We've just handled that hay one time. We can still spread out the nutrients as if we were unrolling it with a bale bed or whatever. And that's pretty slick. Probably has more merit in some places on my farms than even bale grazing. It's always fun. We packed a couple years ago. We packed about 100 bales up on a hillside or whatever, and a guy drove in there. He was delivering something, and man, I could tell he was checking that out and scratching his head. And he said, "Dang, how the heck did you bale that hay up there? I never seen anybody bale hay up on them ridges." And I said, "Well, we didn't bale it up there. We packed it up there when the weather was nice and it was dry in the summer, and that we're going to feed it this winter." And that he was still shaking his head when he pulled off. It just wasn't. He wasn't following. But it's a simple deal. Nice little low cost way to feed hay. Keep that in mind. All right, next I'm going to kind of flow into follow a simple recipe. And if I'm going to probably leave you with one thing today, is simple can be really important. And I love this quote. I use it in just about every talk I've ever given. The ranching business is a simple business. The hard part is keeping it simple. The hard part is keeping it simple. And I don't care if you're traditional or a grazer, we can complicate the heck out of this thing. And I think when we begin to do that, we begin to spend money that we shouldn't. And before I talk about kind of my simple recipe, I put a little statement up there. Just about everybody has their hands out giving you a new idea or an input to purchase. And I think you ought to keep it simple and put your money in your pocket. I'm gonna set this down a minute, but you know, if I pick up any kind of magazine, this is Progressive Cattle. I mean, I'm not picking on these magazines, but you can flip to just about any page and they're trying to sell you something. Some kind of mineral or additive, or fix it with fescue cool. I'm not picking on any of these companies now. I'm just randomly, you know, here's some machinery, and I mean, these things are full of ways to take your money. There's a bunch of equipment, vaccines, and you name it. And those are traditional magazines. They're full of them, right? Everybody agree? Everybody's got their hands out. But one thing I see too, and I love this magazine. This is not a criticism of this magazine. But we get in the grazing world and we think, oh, we're all pretty low cost. Open this thing up. There's still just as many people with their hands out. All they do is they put the word natural or organic in front of it to make you feel better about taking your money. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of tools, but think about them as tools. Don't think about them completely as crutches. And we're just as guilty in this circle. We are maybe more guilty, because once they call it natural and organic, they can charge more too. And so it just seems like money burns a hole in our pocket, and it's just so hard not to give it to somebody. And I'm going to encourage you, just keep it simple and keep your money in your own pocket, and question those expenses. Not just the traditional ones that many of you have already questioned and stopped. But there again, like I said earlier, I know people that wouldn't give $7 for a bag of feed. No way, no. We've cut the feed out of our business, and they'll turn around and spend $70 on some organic additive. You know, I guess I struggle with that a little bit. I don't see that in my world. I'm going to think with my pocketbook first and try to make adjustments to my operation. So anyway, so here's our recipe. Of course, it starts with South Pole cattle, right? They wouldn't have me here if that wasn't the top of the recipe. And so, you know, we got to have the right kind of cattle. You're welcome. And we got to have plenty of pasture, you know, and hay when we run out, and good water. Those are the key nutrients. There again, I've never said today, you know, cut out your, you know, don't give them enough grass or hay. We got to keep the forage in front of them. So real simple, you know, and figure out some way to manage that fits into your life and your schedule. Get the right kind of cattle, plenty to eat, okay? On our place, cattle are born out on pasture. That's pretty simple, but that's where that's what they do. We wean them on pasture. They're not weaned in muddy lots. That doesn't work in my life, and that's not a simple, low-cost recipe to cattle production. And they're going to be developed on grass. We don't have, you know, a bunch of fancy programs for heifer development or bull development. We just develop them like the cows and the bulls we expect them to be. And how can I figure out if they're going to work for me or you if I prop them up? So we just treat them like we treat heifers like we treat cows. That's a pretty simple thing, but it's a pretty profound thing. I already told you number 4 there. We don't supplement. You know, we use minimal chemicals. We're not dewormers or fly sprays. Does that mean our cattle don't have flies? Well, of course they do. Some will fall out and we'll move on. You know, we don't even do a lot of post-weaning vaccinations on our cow herd. Not necessarily recommending that, but we've got a pretty well closed herd, and that's worked for us. Simple. Number 5, and this is a big one for our operation. I wean and preg check on the same day. I've got friends that wean cattle every month. I couldn't stand that. We get them up. We get our cow herd up once a year. We build a portable corral. We catch them. We preg check them. If they're open, they go on the trailer with their calves that we're picking out that we're weaning that day. Very, very simple, and that works great. One time through a shoot. I promise you, my cows are one time through a shoot a year. It's very, very simple. We wean and preg check on the same day. That's a big one. We absolutely sell open cows. That's important enough to me that it's part of my recipe. We get rid of them. I don't care if her name's Myrtle and she's my favorite. She is no longer my favorite when she's open. She's now become my least favorite cow, just like that. And I tell the vet occasionally, now look, you're going to break my heart because I love that cow. Please tell me she's bred. But if she isn't, we're going to get rid of her anyway. So be honest. But anyway, we get rid of them. And there again, I'm so adamant about this, I've basically listed it twice here. And we basically select off of that fertility. We're going to keep bred cows that are doing their job, and we're going to sell the ones that are open. And that's my recipe. And I promise you, if you come to my operation, if I can leave you with one thing, it's simple, simple, simple. That's a simple recipe. We can jack that up in a bunch of ways, but I really try to follow that. Really try to follow that. All right, what about calving time considerations? Good grief, calve when the weather's nice. I mean, don't. I can't imagine. Calve when it's nice on clean pasture, when you got some grass to feed your cow. That is just I can't, that's a no-brainer, I think, in my world. You got to have environmentally adapted animals, because people say, well, my bulls won't breed in the summer, so I can't calve in the spring. I got to have calves in January. So you got to have the right thing, and you got to control the breeding season to do that. But I'll tell you a couple stories, and I think all of us in here have had those aha moments in life, and I love to hear, what different people, when you wake up and you're a new person and a new philosophy and a paradigm shift. And I've had a few in my life, and I had a very good and sharp beef producer and teacher at South Dakota State. And he told me, he said they lived in western South Dakota, and he told the kids this. I mean, he's very humble, and he said, my family been ranching out there for many, many years. And he said, man, we finally got our act together, and we built a state-of-the-art calving barn. And we had a field day to show it off. And he said this thing was nice. We had pens where we had a little facility we could catch a heifer and pull it. And we had calving pens to put them in and mother them up. And he said, you should have seen the dang rows of hay and straw we had stacked up. I mean, he said this thing was beautiful. We had a field day just like this, had a gathering of people, and man, he said the family was so proud. And we was talking about it, and he said there was a guy there from Australia in the back. He didn't say anything, and he raised his hand. He said, I got a question. And this guy's name was Barry. And Barry said, yeah, what's your question? He said, I don't understand. Why don't you just calve when the weather's nice? And he said, I've never been hit so hard in the guts in my entire life. He said, the rest of the field day was horrible. He said, I couldn't even get words out of my mouth, because that's all that was in my brain. And he said, we never did even calve a damn cow out of that facility. He said, it changed my entire life. It was just, I woke up and then I began to question everything I did. And this guy's sharp. I mean, he's the president of the university now, but I mean, just a great, great guy. And I've seen this another time too. I love this calving deal. It's like this is one of those traditions that's hard to break. I went to a little pasture walk in Missouri. This is a pasture walk. These are grazing people. And they had great people. And they had fences and water. I mean, they was doing it right. And they had a lot of little creeks. It was an interesting place, just running everywhere. And this guy had these calving sleds, like a progression of calving sleds that he had on kind of display. And what he said was he had these calves, and with all these creeks in his grazing system, man, he's calving out on pasture, but it was like January, and calves was falling in the creek and getting cold. So he built this kind of crude sled to pull them back to the barn and warm them up. And he said, man, then I sat around that next winter and I built a shed with a sled with like a little calf hut. And that way they was already starting to warm. And then he had a third one. He was really proud of them. And his third one had a deal that had a heating mat in it and a heater. So he could pull it in put the frozen calf in there, pull it in the shop, and then plug it in an instant. And I remembered burying myself, but I wasn't going to do it. I mean, this guy was proud. There wasn't but there's always one person. And he, sure enough, same thing. Got a question, why don't you just calve when it's nicer? And I could tell the same reaction. I mean, it's like he just punched him in the guts. He couldn't talk or do anything. Anyway, this is an easy one, but it doesn't matter. I had a buddy, neighbor. Last year we had an awful February. And his basement was just full of calves trying to trying to keep them alive, you know. And I thought, well, we'll see if he'll change it up. And I've got a set of portable panels on a trailer. He called me about January. He said, I'm going to borrow them panels from you. I said, okay, why's that? He said, well, I'm going to build me a long lane because I'm going to try to get them cows up in the barn when they start calving in February. You know, we just couldn't change when he put the bull in. He was changing. He was just going to make it a little easier on himself. But anyway, you know, keep that in mind. I think that's an easy one to me. But and old Barry, when he finally had that aha moment, it changed their whole life, their whole ranching operation based on that. All right, my next thing. And this one's been a really important one to us. Not going to fit all of you in here, but you know, I put on there someone else's land and someone else's cattle. And Greg Judy's, I put his quote on there: no money, no land, no cattle, no problem. Most of you probably know Greg, and you know, I've been blessed. He just lives a couple hours north of me. And another one of my aha moments in life, I went and listened to Greg almost 20 years ago. He was living in his truck and he was starting to speak, and we were just trying to figure out how can we grow our operation. And his first book, you know, this No Risk Ranching, he just wrote that, and man, he hit me just right, you know, talking about, hey, just rent some ground and lease some cattle from somebody. You don't have to have money that way. And I didn't have any. We was trying to pay for a farm. And anyway, I bought that book and come home and read it all night. And I mean, I was excited. Told my wife, this is what we're doing. And since then, I found this to be hard to do, but I actually rented my first farm with like in a week, you know, and of course we kept doing that. And so that's been a big deal for us. I know there's some of you, I talked to some of you earlier in here, you know, this is a real deal. There's a lot of people out there. There's power in grass. If you can get the grass either by owning it or leasing it, you'll find somebody that's got some cattle. Once I got in this business of leasing cattle and partnerships and everything else, it's all over the place. And right now I've got two partners, one from Tennessee and one from Florida. And so about half of my cattle are not my own. They belong to somebody else. We just take care of them. And you know, this lease cattle deal and lease farms, I've got what I like to call partners. I've got, you know, 11 different landowner partners, and I've got 2 different cattle partners, and it's really important to us. And so it's not going to work for everybody. I get that. But if you don't have any money and you can go out and rent some land and you know, and find some people to run cattle for, that's a pretty big deal. It's really worked well for us, and that's why I have to make it part of my list. Next, diversity is that is complementary. I think, you know, all of us in here are in the cattle business in some way or another, but I'm going to encourage you that, you know, diversity is key. Well, and why is that? Because we can spread out some of our risk, right? We can spread out our cash flow. We can spread that fixed cost of that pickup truck or whatever it is over some different enterprises, right? I think this is a real key to low-cost cattle production. I think we got to be careful here. We get to juggling too many plates in the air, and that all looks pretty impressive when that waiter comes by carrying 20 plates, you know, and juggling them until he drops them all, and then it's a big old mess. And sometimes I see people that they get cattle, and then they're going to have hogs, and then they're going to have chickens, and they're going to have sheep, and they're going to have, and they didn't even have any cattle yet. So you gotta walk into this a little bit, add those enterprises that make sense, but be careful that they truly complement. We've got hair sheep, you know, they work great for us. They don't work great for everybody. That's our diversity. We've got goats, a few goats. They can be a nice complement. I don't care. A lot of you have beef businesses, and I applaud that. That's a great, I mean, what better way to add value to your steers or your cull cows or whatever. So, you know, find something. I was talking to Dakota. I've always got a little interest in this. You know, cut some logs. Do something to add some diversity into your operation, and you know, help yourself there, I think. So, and I'm hoping that I'm doing good on time. I'm gonna leave y'all hopefully some time for questions, but I'm gonna keep moving. All right, what about fertilizer? Boy, you want to get some people riled up. Just talk about fertilizer. My in-laws own a fertilizer business too, so this is really, really, really sensitive. Thankfully, they're not here though. you know, I won't say much here, but I would concern myself with grazing management and soil health, and you know, Becky and some of them, they know Mike, they know a bunch about that. Talk to them. That's where I'd spend my energy. Put some legumes out, maybe. Run less cattle. I'm gonna come back to that understocking thing again. You know, if you feel like you have to spread fertilizer, how about just get rid of some cows and don't spend that money on fertilizer? I actually know producers that have a fertilizer bill that's bigger than their calf check. Now, I'm not a business specialist, but I understand that equation will not work. If you spend more on fertilizer than what your revenue is, well, we can promise you that is a loss, okay? And but this is like an addiction. I truly believe that it is. It is a hard thing to sometimes quit. Now, I think it can be a tool, and I won't tell you that we've got some heavily depleted ground that, you know, has a lot of, especially phosphorus. And so, you know, I think this can be a tool to speed some things up. But just willy-nilly go out there and spread fertilizer. And then around us, they're spreading last year, nobody spread anything because it was so expensive. They said, well, we ain't doing that. Well, then we had dry weather and they didn't think they had enough grass. So this year there's dang buggy tracks everywhere. And guess what? It didn't rain, so it isn't growing anyway. And I had a guy tell me the other day, he said, you know, I put that treatment in the urea where it would last a little bit, but you know, we still didn't get any rain. And he said, well, you know, try to do better next year. It's like, well, how are you gonna? You can't make it rain, you know. So anyway, it's one of those that I don't know. I think you could spend your money elsewhere, and I get asked that a lot in my area. You know, especially last year. What is your solution? You know, you got quite a few cows. What is your solution to this high fertilizer prices? And I said, I've got one. I've got a really good one. I didn't spend any. It was zero. You know, an absolute zero, and that's pretty hard for some people to swallow. They just say, well, I don't understand. You know, I can't. And you know, they get stumbling around and muttering around, and it's a hard one. All right, what about machinery? I love this topic. Love machinery, because if y'all been to my place, I don't want to tell you I don't have some equipment, but I don't own mixers and feed wagons and silage choppers and hay equipment. I don't own any of that stuff. You know, a lot of that I don't even think belongs in the beef cow business. It's too expensive. And I'm going to say in general, my advice would be to resist machinery purchase urges. I think if you can go to bed with that at night, and that's your last thought, man, that's probably good. And think about it the next morning, because boy, we're hit all the time with that one too. And the only thing, in my opinion, and this might not settle well with some of you, you can see my picture up there with a bunch of junk equipment. To me, the only thing worse than having excess equipment you don't need is owning junk equipment. And here's my argument for that. If this piece of equipment is so important to you, and I've got a nice tractor, I do, and I've justified in my little brain that it's important to me. And if you can tell me I've got to have this plow or whatever it is, tractor, I don't care. And you can justify it in your brain, in your mind, in your operation, that I'm going to argue that you should be able to justify that it's a decent piece of equipment. Because otherwise, you're going to be working on it. And parts are expensive. And I have seen this so many times in my life that farmers working on junk equipment is not part of saving money in the cattle business. You think it is. I'm buying a cheap piece of equipment because I can work on it. This is one of those areas I'd just tell you I'd spend money on something decent, or more importantly, just don't have it. But there again, that's not going to settle well with all of you. But I'm from Missouri and I'm going to live a long ways from here, and so I'm going to go home and y'all think about what I told you. All right. Oop. It wants me to stay even longer there. It says my battery's running low. See, that's what happens. You go to relying on equipment and it will break you. I'll get a drink. I got all fired up about equipment. I got thirsty. All right, this next one I put as a topic here: wage a war on debt and other financial suggestions. And Bert Tykert, do y'all know Bert Tykert? Y'all read about him a little bit. He's a former manager of Deseret Ranches. That's the largest commercial cattle operation in the country, owned by the Church of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon church. And I was lucky enough, 20-some years ago, I went and visited Deseret, and that was a wake-up call. That Burke and his bit, they run things like a business. And read about Burke. He's kind of retired again, and he used to do a little bit of writing, and he still does. He's a great guy, but he says that all the time: wage a war on debt. And that's pretty important. I mean, really, I talked about several things today, but if we what's interest rates these days? I think about 8%. So this might be the most important thing we can do to cut costs in the cattle business. Doesn't have nothing to do with cattle, but I'd argue an amortization table might be more important than a gestation table. And these are the things we really don't like talking about. And I hear this all the time: I ain't got time to move cattle. We just ain't got time. And the other thing I hear is, I don't have time to mess with the bank and the paperwork. And I thought a lot about this, and I think, and I'm going to encourage you in your operation, to find the time. I think you should spend 20% of your farming time working on paperwork and planning and financial things. And that's hard for us to do, because I want to be outside, right? And I want to be doing that, and you got to force yourself. Oh, I'm going to wait for a rainy day. Well, I've been waiting on one of them for 30 days, And but this is a big deal. I did a little math, and the math worked out really cool. But if you borrow $100,000 for 20 years, and we was paying 4% interest, that's about $45,000 a year. Now, all of a sudden, here in just a few months, a $100,000 loan for 20 years at 8% interest, that's $100,000 in interest you'll pay. It's actually worked out where that's double. That $100,000 you borrowed, you're going to have to pay it back twice. That's a lot. So maybe this little bit of my talk didn't matter as much when interest was 3 or 4%, but it's no longer 3 or 4%, And I'm a product of my family had some loans, and my wife's family had some loans back in the 80s at 18 and 20%. I don't know that we're going there. But after knowing what they went through, I don't want to go there. And so, find the time here. This is a little bit of an attitude change too, just like embracing grazing management. I'm blessed. I've got a guy that helps me, and he's a Dave Ramsey nut. Anybody in here listen to Dave Ramsey? Find somebody like Dave Ramsey. I'm not suggesting him necessarily, but you just got to start talking about it to your significant other, your helper. We do. When we haul cattle around and stuff, he turns on Dave Ramsey, and I kind of got geared into that. And it just makes you think, and it makes you question, and just spend some time strategizing and planning for cash flow and and cost, and it's just an attitude change a little bit. Go to your skip the next cattleman meeting and go to a finance meeting or something. I mean, if this is an issue, find the time. And tax mitigation. If you're making money in this business, you got to pay taxes. So then you spend some time trying to figure out ways to mitigate that a little bit. And this is a way to, we can really make some money in this business by spending our time here, I think. And so I'm just going to read this to you. This is I ran across this book a few years ago, and I was introduced to some of these thoughts. I had a boss that sent me to this, and I thought, well, man, I'm an animal science guy. Well, I don't want to go to some self-help deal, this is terrible. But I put on there, don't try to do everything. Okay, and I'm going to read you this. One of the most liberating concepts in life is that you don't have to be great at everything. You don't have to be great at everything. Once we figure that out, we're free to pursue what we're actually good at, what brings us joy, and what we can uniquely contribute. And I think that's a pretty powerful quote. Now, I know farmers are jack of all trades. We pride ourselves on that, right? Something breaks, we fix it. We build all of our own fence. We do it all, right? That's what makes farmers special. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You can hire a contractor to build your fence. You don't have to do it all. You don't. You can hire a mechanic. They exist in your world. Now, some of you are going to say, no, they don't. No, they don't. We do not have a good fence contractor around here. Well, guess what? I have just found your diversity. Then build fence for other people, because there's a true opportunity there if you're going to make that argument. So we just don't have to do everything. One of the best things I do is my mechanic. If you can imagine in your head just this grease monkey of a mechanic, that's him. I mean, he's the spitting image of he can fix everything, lays down there in the dirt and fixes stuff. He's great. Works on your cars or equipment. He doesn't care. Got a wrecker truck, the whole 9 yards. And he's got a little farm. And he can't raise cattle for nothing. He's terrible at it. He's a great mechanic and terrible at running cattle. We rented his farm, and I can put 15 cows over there, and I don't make a dime because I drop my stuff off for him to work on and check my cows. And guess what, though? I'm doing something that I'm sure better at, raising cattle. I'm sure better at that than I am mechanicking, and he is definitely not good at raising cattle. So he can focus on what he does. I can focus on what I do. And so I'm going to argue to you, just run more cattle. If that's what you're good at, run more cattle and hire some of this stuff done. Not all of it, but don't try to be everything. I think this is another area where we think we're saving ourselves a lot of money sometimes, and we're truly not. We're just spinning our wheels. We're too busy. I don't have time to move the cows. I don't have time to go visit with my banker because I'm out here trying to fix something. So find something. I included a couple of my favorite pictures. This might irritate some of y'all too, but there's another thing too. I have loaded a lot of cattle through the years, and I talk to people and I deliver a lot of cattle. And they say, what do you charge to deliver? And I tell them, no, I ain't doing that. I'm going to come get them myself. I can save a bunch of money. And they're thinking I'm a low-cost cattle producer because I'm going to haul my own cattle. So I included my two favorite. I'm going to write a book someday on cattle haulers and cattle trailers. It's mostly going to be a picture book. And here was one of my favorites. That guy showed up to haul some heifers. And I'm not talking about hauling them 10 miles. He was a long ways from home. And I'm going to argue, he didn't make it either. Somebody had to come get him. And I'm going to argue, he did not save money. You know, you don't have to be everything. It's really cool that he has a Model T and a stock rack, but you don't have to. This was my other favorite. This is not, I didn't just take this. I took that picture. I loaded a South Pole bull in the back of that thing. But, and that's pretty neat, But anyway, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to build your own fence. You don't have to haul your own cattle. If that works for you, then do more of it. You know, make it a custom deal or something. And sometimes you just need to let somebody else do it. But anyway, all right, I'm going to finish up right here. And this is my last little thing. And I just labeled this other tidbits, just some things here. And I know a lot of you are already doing this. You wouldn't be here if you don't have a open mind and a being out of the box thinker. But I do think that's a really important thing. I hate the words. I think tradition is stupid. It has nothing to do with what today is. You know, that's how we always have done it. That won't work. You're from Missouri. That won't work in Virginia. You know, that's not how we do things. And you know, we all get hit with that kind of language, and you know, I'm sorry, but it's not part of my vocabulary. And but we always, you know, we all need to be challenged with that all the time. Be an open mind. Be a lifetime learner. You guys are here, so you're already fitting that category. You're here trying to learn. I love to read a lot in the winter, and you know, and I hope I learn something while I'm here, and I know I will. I try to learn. I try to take home one thing everywhere I'm at, not a bunch of things, because then you start trying to be cookie cutting what somebody else is doing. That won't work either. But be a lifetime learner. Declutter. I don't know if y'all know this or not, but they've got like Facebook Marketplace now. You can sell your junk, okay? Some of y'all don't need to be in the low-cost cattle business. You just need to live off of selling all your extra stuff, you know, and you can make a living doing that. So get rid of all that extra stuff. I have a rule. If I haven't used something for 2 or 3 years, I just get rid of it. You won't even hardly remember down the road anyway. And put that money in your pocket use it for something more useful. And I do think, how does that fit in low-cost cattle production? Because I think we get so cluttered up with ideas and cluttered up with junk and stuff that we don't even know what we got, and we're spending money, replacing something that's probably laying out there in the pile. And so, get your stuff organized. It kind of goes along with that. Make efficient use of your time. That kind of goes back to that planning. Spend 20% of your week planning and working on finances and paperwork and figuring out where you're going, so you're not going over the top of yourself. I think these are more important than some of the cattle and the grazing. I really do. I think this can separate you a little bit here. Be efficient. I love keeping a to-do list. That keeps me online. I used to keep it on paper. Now I've went to my phone. I pull my notes up. I'm dead in the water without it. I have no clue what I'm doing on Monday without it. And you might question, well, how does that? I don't understand how that fits into low-cost cattle production. It keeps me efficient. It keeps me from going over the top of myself. We try to line things out. We don't forget something that needs to be done, and so forth. I'm such my wife says a freak about my to-do list that I'll sometimes go outside and perform a task and go to my to-do list. Dang it wasn't on there. I put it on there and then erase it and go, I got it done. So it just makes me feel good. So y'all should try it. And I'm gonna leave you with the last thing. Keep it simple. I always try to come up with one thing. You got great cattle out here, guys. I don't want to downplay that. You got a good opportunity out, but I do want to leave you with one thought. If I can send you home with one thing when it comes to low-cost cattle production, keep it simple. We can overcomplicate things, and I think if I really take a hard look at my operation and say, okay, what's working for me, and what's not, and what rises to the top, I think that keep it simple is really, really a big deal for me. And so, anyway, there's kind of a summary. We talked about all that stuff. I won't go over that. I'll save a little bit more time for questions, but just to highlight some things. Raise the right kind of cattle, graze them right, follow a simple recipe, kind of think about some of those other things on there. And then them last 2 or 3 topics was kind of, didn't have as much to do with cattle, but probably just as important. With that, I don't know how much time we have, Becky, but I'll be glad to entertain a few questions. And otherwise, once again, it's a pleasure being here, and loved getting to stand up here and talk to y'all. The question was, we cull open cows, but how do we evaluate the bulls? We first of all, half of that evaluation is going to come from the cow, and so she's going to have to have been a cow that's been productive in our system and been there at it for a while. And then after that, we're just going to kind of look at some of the key indicators that we feel like that we're looking for in a bull or a cow. We want them to be slick. Especially if it's in the summertime or whatever, we want them to have the ability to be slick. We want them to have big guts, be the right size, moderate, have plenty of muscle. I'm still in the beef business, and have a good disposition. So try to keep that pretty simple. Just kind of make sure they look like a bull, but most importantly, before we ever look at them, make sure they come out of the right kind of cow. And try not to overcomplicate that either. Yes, sir.
Can you expand a little bit on your comment on vaccinations, especially for?
The question is expand a little bit on the vaccination thing, and I want to be a little bit hesitant and a little bit careful about how I answer your question. I'm going to tell you what we do. We thoroughly vaccinate the calves. I mean, when I say thoroughly, we use 2 or 3 different vaccinations. Tetanus for one, because we banned our bulls. And so we feel like we need to do that. We've got some blackleg issues on some farms. I mean, I had a guy want to buy some steers from me one time, and he didn't want them to have a blackleg shot. And I just said, look, you're going to have to go somewhere else. I mean, they're going to die without it. Okay, so I'm a realist. And so we do a pretty good job of vaccinating at weaning. But since we basically have a closed herd, we have chose not to, and I want to be careful. I'm not advocating this, but we've chose not to. We haven't vaccinated a cow in probably 15 years. So no annual vaccinations. That's you gotta, sometimes you got to spend money to make money. And so if and hey, just because I stand up here and tell you what I do today, I have a train wreck, which I hope I don't, but if I would have a little problem, I'll back up and go to doing something. But, it's a little bit of weighing out, spending that money on a vaccination versus, the benefit you get from it. That's what we do. Not advocating that, though. I want to be clear about that. Got time for one more?
You said when you bring your cows into preg check and wean, how do you wean?
Okay, good question. Just want to talk about when we bring the cows in and preg check and wean. And so, first of all, if you've got the right setup where you've got cattle at home or something, I love fence line weaning and some of those strategies. I want to be crystal clear about that. But one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of talk to you all a little bit about my operation on the front is just so you kind of understand, everybody's got limits and challenges, and sometimes those become excuses. Let's be clear about that too. But we've got several rent farms. They're not connected for the most part. And so what we do is we load those open cows. We just hard wean the calves. I mean, we're jerking them off the cow. We will take those calves home and wean them, work them, and put them in pasture, on a pasture. And they're going to run around and bawl because mom's several miles away. It's not a fence line wean situation. We've got one set of cows we can do that with that we bring home. We graze them home and wean them. And so that's not an ideal system. That's just kind of how we've dealt with it with those lease farms. I do think there's a couple important things there that can help is that weaning them on pasture. We really like that, get them on a clean environment. It's not as good as fence line weaning, but it helps. And then it's sometimes nice when we've got those older open cows there. They can settle those cows down a little bit, settle those calves down a little bit. So that helps.
You ever thought about the weaner?
Yeah, the nose deals, we have, and I've used them occasionally. And there again, you can look at this as this is my excuse why I don't do it, but we are setting up a portable pen, trying to catch those cattle once, and so I would have to set up, catch them, put the nose clips in. If some fall out, set up again, and then come back later and pull them out. So I think they're an excellent tool. For us, with the lack of facilities on some of those lease farms, we just haven't seen that as a practical.
The orange ones are better.
Right, that bolt in, yeah. And
No, they don't bolt in. It's just like the yellow ones. They're orange.
Oh, okay.
And,
Yeah.
That's what we do. We get there. We can keep them in for years.
Right, yeah. I think for us, it just kind of goes back to that catching them up one time versus multiple times. Becky, you cut me off if we get too long.
So what age are your kids when you
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's because we might not be that traditional. What age do we wean? Our calves are going to be born in April and May, and we are going to wean everything in November. So that's pretty traditional from a guy that stood up here and told you I'm not very traditional, right? Because we got a lot of folks that are self-weaning and weaning late. So you might ask, why do we do that? I've got a host of reasons. One, I love to deer hunt, so if I can get them weaned right before deer season, I don't have to worry about it. But that work's done. Otherwise, I stand out there and I deer hunt, and I think, I need to be weaning calves. That's one reason. Second of all, by weaning them in November, and I haven't talked about this, but that allows us, we move some cows to farms that have been sitting empty, and we graze some mature grass all winter. So if I can get them weaned, I don't have to haul pairs. It's just cheaper for me to haul a cow than a pair. Okay, and so that allows me to shuffle some cows around to try to be more efficient with a winter feeding situation or winter grazing situation. Third, by weaning traditional, or maybe even a little early for some of you, it really drops the nutritional requirements of those cows, right? I mean, that's the problem with too much milk, is it's a nutritional drain on the cow. And so we can really drop the demands of those cows because we've seized lactation, right? And so by doing that, we can run them on, and they can eat a pretty low quality hay and gain weight through the winter. They can graze and gain weight where if they had that cow still nursing on, we'd probably set that back a little bit. And the final reason we do that is because if I can wean a calf in November, I can make some selling decisions in that same year. I can sell that calf in December and put it on that income on this year's taxes, or I can drag that calf into January or much later, but I can be right on one side or the other the first of the year and try to mitigate some taxes. So those are the reasons we wean when we do. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's probably one of the more traditional things that I do, but I might have some untraditional reasons for doing it. Cutting me off.
Let's give
Thank you.